уже третье упражнение делаем.
Naturally, we start with a very large, lean Morozov with an oddly high amount of acne, probably just from his diet. But this type of sarcastic, sardonic approach to training is quite common with more experienced athletes, since much like anybody doing anything full-time, they have done it past the point of excitement and novelty, but it is still necessary and simply a part of everyday life.
По плану много чего. Приседаю 270, жму. Все, что в зале есть. Но они не растут у меня. Левая вообще маленькая.
First of all, he's training side pressure, which we'll get to in a second. But in regards to his leg size and lack of growth, as he says, it's an interesting discussion as to whether arm wrestlers do need to bother with training legs. Many people would say that they don't, and many don't, without any significant decrease in performance. But I would say that while obviously excess weight in the legs will be a hindrance at some point in any weight category sports, being generally stronger all around is never really a weakness for any athlete or regular person. If you are able to squat 270 kilograms, which is a reasonable amount of weight to squat by most standards, then you are going to be mentally less intimidated by weights in general, allowing you probably to use more weight in all of your training, even arm wrestling specific training, which is, I would say, a useful thing. Secondly, we can see here that Morozov is training side pressure more or less directly from the side, but in a form that targets internal rotation in more isolation than complete side pressure. These muscles are relatively weak, so you'll only usually see people doing this exercise with lighter weights as a warm-up or as an assistance exercise. When I have seen people training from the side very heavily, it is usually either like this but with a more static arm position while the body moves or holds, or it is training more pure sideways movement through adduction of the humerus horizontally rather than internal rotation. It is, more often than not, hook pullers or those more dependent on sideways pressure that typically will emphasize this type of training. But I think it can be important for all types of pullers to at least not have weak side pressure. There is a lot more to having good side pressure than simply having strong internal rotation or humeral adduction, but I am, as I have said, working on a full-depth video about training side pressure, so all of this will be covered in more depth there. But back to the actual video.
Когда вот бороться с Майклом будет, тоже стол будем вот так держать.
And here we see Laletin doing the same side pressure through internal rotation exercise. As I said, people usually do this more dynamic internal rotator exercise as a warm-up or accessory with lighter weight to more specifically target the smaller internal rotators inside the shoulder, without the rest of the body putting itself into a more optimal position to shift heavier weight. And this next exercise, the preacher hook curl, whatever you want to call it, is another exercise for internal rotation, which is similar to the previous one, but essentially puts you in a position where you can put more load on internal rotation as a movement than purely just the shoulder internal rotators, by incorporating more assisting muscles to make it more of a compound exercise.
Artyom, где поддержка?
Давай, Виталия, давай! Давай!
Which is a good point, because if he's going to be going against Michael Todd, then the chances are that Michael Todd will very likely catch him in a held position and then hold him there for a long time. Even if Laletin would eventually win, it would require a lot of endurance to be in a state at the end of that to be able to continue.
Выносливость. А что не поджимаешь?
Here we have Morozov and Kantik, who you may have not seen yet, but he's an upcoming teenage star in Russian circles, having recently pulled with Akimbo 69 very well considering his age.
Ну-ка выставись. А что сюда, что свободен?
Ну, не хочу напрягаться.
Не, ну понятное дело. Это же я тоже не хочу.
As you have probably guessed from his starting position and the other videos, Kantik is primarily a top roller and one who prioritizes speed. Typically, that type of puller easily overlooks side pressure, especially at the start position. We can see it with pullers like Arsen Liliev, who, although he is very strong, his strength is primarily in his initial hit and back pressure. Like Kantik and many other speed back pressure focused top rollers, if you are able to stop them near center, they have already committed to full backwards momentum and have left their elbow open and without any sideways support, making them very weak to simple sideways pressure.
Просто чуть заряжай плечо сразу.
And this is often made worse by the way many top rollers like to start in the hand, without really adding much tension, since being more loose allows you to move more quickly, and tensing up too much generally slows you down. Ideally, you would want to be able to move quickly while still having some amount of side pressure protection from the shoulder, which you typically can get more of by not throwing your body backwards so much and keeping the elbow angle tighter, so you aren't throwing yourself into a borderline king's move.
Вот так плечо заряжаешь. Вот. Сразу другая песня началась.
So as we said, now he is in a better position to protect his side pressure from the start. He may initially be a bit slower, but if he can practice with this new position, then he may be able to, or should be able to, incorporate his initial speed style start.
Тёма говорил, что он тебе что-то подскажет такого, чтобы Тодда дожать. Уже была эта подсказка?
Пока мне еще ничего Артем не подсказал. Я жду не дождусь. Может быть, он ждет, пока маленечко народ разойдется. Возможно, это какой-то секрет.
Obviously, they are joking quite a bit with the whole secret exercise thing, but there is definitely some validity to having special training for different opponents, especially when you get to the elite level at super matches where you have a single opponent multiple times who has quite a high chance of having a unique style of pulling that you wouldn't encounter elsewhere.
Давай попробуем у него тихонько спросить.
Давай.
And to stop again, here we see Morozov again training side pressure directly in a style more like we've seen from Todd Hutchings, which focuses less on internal rotation but more on resisting external rotation, and then focuses even more on loading the elbow and humeral horizontal adduction to keep the arm strongly held to the side, while challenging pronation at the top end. This is not necessarily an exercise that everybody needs, but it is unlikely that anybody would suffer from training it if it was done sensibly, like any other exercise.
Ты мне обещала подсказать секретное упражнение против Майкла Тодда.
Да.
Мы как раз сейчас это и делаем.
Одно из.
Одно из. Ну, наверное, подождем, пока все уйдут, да?
Да.
И потом уже покажем. А то потом начнется: Майкл, смотри, что против тебя Лалитин с Морозовым замышляют.
Соберутся все клоуны вот эти. Ну не, Майкл Тодд хороший. Я его люблю, он хороший парень. Да?
They do make a valid point about the level of gossip and whining about arm wrestling online. So I wonder if that is the same case in many other sports, but it seems to be particularly toxic with arm wrestling.
Не, я наоборот, сначала вот сюда ее вяжу, просто чтобы она потом не натирала, понял? И теперь просто перебрасываю.
Смотри, ты делаешь вот сюда, а я протягиваю сюда.
Okay, so here we are going more in depth into that exercise we just saw. So obviously, if you are going to take videos of a single training session at an expo as representative of their entire training system, side pressure and pronation are, in the minds of Morozov and Laletin, keys to fighting Michael Todd.
Пониже сядь, тебе же надо залезть. Ты должен залезть туда.
So as he seems to be saying, rather than going to the side with a strong but neutral wrist rotation, commit more to aggressive pronation all the way with back pressure loaded throughout.
Когда бляшка на твоей стороне, сильно не надо затягивать.
Да, я не затягиваю сильно.
С ним не надо. Он будет вот выставлять. Так.
Ну, хорош, допустим, да?
So Morozov seems to think, probably rightly so, that Michael Todd is going to try and climb over Laletin's hand in the setup, So Laletin should be prepared to counter this because for most people, letting Laletin have a higher hand is going to result in quite a difficult pull.
Да. Он будет вот ползти. Да. Сейчас дай-ка я напрягусь потихоньку. Но ты не дергай. Я также не умею бороться. Сейчас чуть-чуть. Во, правильно, залез.
And here they are obviously trying to simulate the style with which Michael Todd will almost undoubtedly pull with.
Ну, то есть сюда подзалезть и прокрутить больше.
Да, ты его прям перехватывать, да. Выше туда залазить.
Только чуть натяни.
Так, давай вот так маленько. Бля, не могу лево держать, оказывается. Нет. О.
It's interesting to see that since Morozov is very lean, that he seems to have very well developed abductor pollicis longus and extensor pollicis brevis, which are two muscles which work to abduct and extend the thumb respectively, and in arm wrestling, essentially both contribute to rising.
И руку нужно не вот так держать.
Again, height and pronation seem to be the main focus here, which is more or less the same approach Devon Larratt took against Michael Todd before. If you are not 6'8" like Laletin, having someone who is 6'8" with a huge hand rising and pronating hard against you is quite a difficult experience, to say the least.
А сюда, да? Вот.
Да, ты должен, то есть, блядь, фонтан. Ты должен выше туда, то есть выше туда залазить. Как бы залазить и прокручивать туда. У него еще кисть же до конца не открывается.
It's true that Michael Todd does have quite a stiff wrist, especially in defending against deep extension, so Laletin may not be able to achieve that full strong pronation that we are seeing him get here.
Помимо угла еще кисть. То есть не как у меня видишь, она, а у него все, мобильности нету. Он ждет, он получается, когда здесь стоит, вот он получается ждет твоей ошибки, чтобы, блядь, залететь, понял?
Again, it is true that we have seen Michael Todd do just that, sit and wait for an optimal time to strike. So what Morozov says about holding position and gradually climbing is probably going to work much better from Laletin than rushing and lessening pressure.
Он очень быстрый в этом плане. А тебе надо прям вот вы встали, он стоит, перехватывать должен, выше, да. Планомерно должен, вот по чуть-чуть, как бы его раз, по чуть-чуть должен перехватывать. Бок контролирует.
Ну-ка, что потяни.
Я в крюк что-то. Давай попробуй.
It's quite interesting to see taller athletes try and pull in a hook, because a lot of them, as I have experienced, have trouble actually getting into the hook because there is so much more of them that needs to move to get into a good position. Whereas with a top roll or more outside style pulling, then they are able to simply get in position and basically just leverage themselves into their opponent's hand.
Майкл, монстр.
О, давай вот так попробуем.
Давай.
Давай.
So on an ending note, I would like to point out that this is a good example of table time focused on purely practicing, rather than the full force style that many people seem to associate with any time spent on the table. If you can step off the gas a little bit on the table, you can spend much more time on the table, train more frequently, and get more out of training than just sore arms. But that's it. If you like this less formal type of content, then let me know and I'll do more. And if you have anything you'd like me to watch like this, then let me know that too. And if you don't like it, well, there are plenty of other things to do in life. But that's it for today, and I'll see you next time.